This journey, the one you're currently walking, was never an accident. Let's be absolutely clear. You didn't just stumble into that situation, and there's no such thing as mere chance when we talk about the deepest connections of the soul. Forget luck, forget coincidence, forget the idea that this was a random encounter. Something far more powerful was at play. A profound, silent, spiritual magnet was pulling you forward, not with spoken instructions or logical arguments, but with a deep, unmistakable force resonating from the core of your being. This silent tug was guiding you straight to a soul who was quietly, desperately breaking, a sacred light on the very edge of extinction. They weren't making a scene. They weren't publicly demanding attention or screaming for help from the rooftops. In fact, they were doing everything in their power to hide their pain, to appear fine. But the quiet cry of a deeply wounded spirit still reached the heavens, and while the rest of the world hurried by, preoccupied with their own paths, you did the one thing no one else did. You stopped. Even if your rational mind had no idea why this felt so urgent, even if the timing was inconvenient and it made no earthly sense, you couldn't walk away. This is because your spirit instantly recognized a calling, a divine presence, a silent plea buried deep beneath the perfect, flawless facade they had constructed. There were no grand celestial fireworks or booming pronouncements echoing in the sky. No supernatural event offered concrete proof that you needed to interfere. Yet somehow you knew. You didn't set out that day planning to be a hero, and you certainly didn't ask for the intense weight of this responsibility. However, your soul, operating on a level deeper than your conscious mind, had already whispered its affirmative answer. Why? Because you, the chosen one, were specifically dispatched. You were sent into that precise moment, orchestrated with flawless divine timing, not to lecture or to try and logically fix their problems, but simply to bear witness and fulfill a unique assignment that no other soul on earth could complete. This divine mandate asked a profound thing of you: to carefully pour your light, your very essence, into a vessel that had tragically forgotten its own inherent holiness. Your task was, in essence, to silently rescue a fallen angel, a mission you would carry out without the promise of public acknowledgement, without the lure of personal glory, but with the unwavering clarity of sacred purpose. Understand this: the connection you felt is not the result of a happy coincidence, and reading this message is not just a passing moment in a video. It is a powerful confirmation. If that quiet, unexplainable fire in your chest has suddenly intensified, then you are already standing in your truth. You already know what this means. When you feel that internal shift, that profound resonance, it's not for me, the voice speaking to you, but rather a spiritual signal back to the universe that the message has landed and been received by the correct soul. Acknowledge this truth in your heart and know that your unique journey is far from complete. What is unfolding in your life now was established and written into the fabric of time long before your physical arrival here. And now, the moment has come to finally, fully reawaken and remember the profound reason you were sent here in the first place, into this specific time and space. That person, they were never just a casual friend, a mere acquaintance, a passing stranger, or an ordinary partner. No, they were a deliberate divine link, placed directly in your path with the kind of surgical precision that only unseen, benevolent hands can execute. These are the hands you might not physically see, but whose presence you have always felt, a deep, comforting certainty. You didn't just run into them. Your entire soul was dispatched to their side, and your assignment, it didn't arrive neatly printed in a formal letter. It wasn't handed to you by an angelic messenger standing on your doorstep, declaring, "This soul is sacred. You must protect them." But deep within your instinctive gut, the truth resonated loud and clear. You understood there was something extraordinary about them, a captivating blend of the holy and the gravely wounded. They carried a core of light that once sang in perfect harmony with the heavens, but which had been tragically reduced to faint whispers and profound silence. And yet you heard the silence. Even when they uttered nothing at all, your soul felt the echoes of their unseen battles. You sensed the presence of their shadows. They might have smiled convincingly, but you saw the subtle, heartbreaking cracks in their composure. While everyone else accepted the mask they wore, you uniquely read the truth of their soul. This goes far beyond simple empathy or mere human kindness. This was divine alignment in its purest form. You weren't just being a nice person. You were actively on assignment. And here is the profound secret that very few people are privileged to grasp. Your spirit signed the contract for this mission long before the day you were born. Before you ever took your first conscious breath on this planet, this profound connection, this specific mission, and this particular soul were meticulously written into the scroll of your destiny. This is precisely why you were utterly incapable of looking away. It's why the thought of simply walking away, even when your mind screamed for peace and personal space, felt profoundly wrong and unnatural. This was never a matter of simple, straightforward logic. This was a complex, elegant divine orchestration, a powerful call sent directly from heaven, intricately concealed within the soft, human cloak of your deepest compassion. They didn't send out a broadcasted plea for saving. They didn't cry out for immediate help. Yet their deep, aching silence reached the ears of the Almighty, and you, my friend, were sent as the ultimate living response. You didn't arrive with a loud, attention-grabbing sermon. You didn't come to overwhelm them with eloquent words. You came with the simple, profound power of your presence. Because sometimes the divine doesn't deploy a professional preacher. He sends a living presence, a compassionate heart, a guiding light. You weren't required to fix them in the conventional sense. Your role was to anchor them. You didn't need to change who they fundamentally were. You simply needed to gently remind them of the magnificent being they had always been, and the one they still remain. You held a safe, sacred space for a deep, profound light that everyone else had dismissed as nothing more than a temporary problem. You became the faithful guardian of a precious flame that had come perilously close to being extinguished forever. And this is where the mystery of your destiny truly begins to deepen. Why you? Why did you experience that sudden, overwhelming urgency for someone you barely, if at all, knew? Why did your soul respond with such a powerful, immediate leap, even as your logical mind instructed you, let it go, this isn't yours? Why did this particular soul manifest in your life at that precise, critical moment when your own world was also quietly shaking and shifting? Because this intricate dance was never solely about them. It was just as much about you. The overarching mission was not just about saving another soul. It was fundamentally about waking you up to your own innate power. Heaven knew that if you could manage to see and honor the divine spark within a seemingly fallen angel, you would inevitably be forced to re-acknowledge and remember the divine within yourself. It was a process of mutual, powerful ignition. One soul was flickering in the darkness of its silence, and the other was powerfully carrying an unstoppable fire. The moment your two paths intersected, the precious flame within both of you was instantly and forever returned. But the realization grows even more profound. What if, just what if, that beautiful, silent soul you reached out to and helped rescue, you wasn't the only one assigned to your watch? What if that initial connection was merely the very first, subtle ripple in a far more vast and intricate divine plan? What if you have, in fact, been performing this sacred work all along, completely unaware of the magnitude of your actions? And what if, even as you read these words, there is another soul already making their inexorable way toward your path, quietly waiting for the unique illumination of your light to guide them? Stay focused on this truth, because what is coming next has the power to fundamentally reevaluate everything you thought you knew about your own past, the true nature of your deepest connections, and the ultimate, hidden tapestry of your life's purpose. The signs have always been present. The only difference is that you didn't have the context to fully understand what you were observing until this very moment. They didn't scream, they didn't beg for mercy, and they certainly didn't stage a public, dramatic collapse for the whole world to witness. They did something far more insidious. They simply faded. They faded tragically into the background, cleverly hidden behind polite, practiced smiles. They faded into a seemingly functional life that looked perfectly acceptable and fine from the outside, but which was relentlessly suffocating them on the inside. This was not a loud, spectacular fall. This was a terrifying, silent descent into spiritual apathy, and because the breakdown lacked any dramatic flair, no one noticed it. But you, the designated observer, you did. What everyone else interpreted as commendable strength, your keenly attuned spirit instantly recognized as a desperate act of mere survival. And survival, you instinctively knew, is not the same thing as true peace, it's camouflage. They were never truly okay. They were simply invisible in plain sight. A soul that was once intended to be utterly radiant was now tragically dimmed by the crushing weight of a material world that never truly understood or accepted them. You could keenly feel their struggle even before they opened their mouth, before they shared even a single personal detail. You felt that subtle, pervasive ache, that hidden flicker in their eyes that communicated a profound loss. I used to believe in something transcendent, but now I'm just trying to make it through the next hour. This went deeper than conventional depression or fleeting sadness. This was the spiritual crisis of a divine being completely severed from their own essential light. This was a celestial assignment that had been violently crushed by rejection, tragically muted by betrayal, and utterly buried beneath a mountain of unrealistic expectations that were never, in the whole architecture of heaven, meant for them to shoulder. They were simply not built for the restrictive constructs of this world. That is precisely why the world, in its sheer gravity, began to break them down. They spoke with soft reverence, moved through their days with gentle hesitation, and secretly dreamed wildly in the confines of their silence. And yet every signal, every pressure around them incessantly commanded them to stop, to dim their inherent glow, to blend in, to hide the holy part of who they were. And so, tragically, they stopped shining. Not because they suddenly became unworthy of their own light, but because no one had ever affirmed that their spiritual wings were still allowed to be fully opened and free. Until you arrived, you saw it, didn't you? That unmistakable divine residue clinging to their energy, that pervasive ache that seemed too ancient to belong to just this current lifetime, that stunning purity of spirit that felt profoundly old, otherworldly, and yet utterly real. This was never just an ordinary person. This was in essence an angel who had forgotten their own identity, and heaven sent you, not with the intention to repair them, but to find them. Because angels do not always fall from grace in a spectacular display of fire and deafening thunder. Sometimes they fall in profound, heartbreaking silence, in a slow, invisible, debilitating agony. And when they do enter that dark descent, the Creator doesn't dispatch a powerful army. He sends a quiet witness, a steady companion, a soul perfectly tuned and equipped like yours. You were the one who finally noticed the crucial thing that everyone else walked straight past. You were the one who felt the spiritual dissonance. You expertly picked up on the tiny, crucial divine signals hidden in their nervous laughter, in their subtle hesitations, in their desperate hunger for a truth they could no longer even name. They possessed no earthly vocabulary to articulate their need for help. But you amazingly didn't need the words, because this exchange was never about language. This was about pure, instantaneous recognition, spirit to spirit, light to light. And now, prepare for the most astonishing revelation of all. What if, just what if, this angel's profound descent was not an accident? What if their falling was, in fact, a necessary, intricate part of a much higher, grander design? What if they were required to fall to provide the catalyst that made you remember the profound truth that you, too, were intentionally sent? Because in the very act of reaching out and lifting them, you were forced to see a reflection of yourself. You were reminded of all the times you, too, had quietly faded when your own magnificent spiritual wings were clipped by the sheer, unyielding pressure of the material world. And suddenly, the whole mission expanded. This was no longer exclusively about them. It became about both of you, two divine lights meeting, not in a picture of perfection, but in a sacred, divine collision of purpose. And now, there is something absolutely crucial that the heavens are trying to impress upon your spirit. Something about the specific reason this angel was perfectly placed in your life at that exact moment. It's a truth you could not have possibly anticipated, but which will instantly illuminate and make sense of everything that has transpired. Stay with me now, because this next realization is going to fundamentally change the way you view and honor every single soul you have ever carried, comforted, or connected with. The hard truth is that they had almost completely convinced themselves that the divine had forgotten them, that maybe they were too irreparably broken, too lost, too profoundly abandoned to ever be seen or remembered again. They had mastered the art of smiling in public, laughing when required, and playing their societal role with skill. But deep inside, they were quietly unraveling. Not with active anger, but with a bone, deep spiritual exhaustion. The quiet, insidious kind that whispers, maybe I was never meant to make it this far. They weren't angry at the divine. They were merely disconnected, spiritually numb, fighting brutal battles no one could see, and secretly agonizing over why heaven had become so profoundly quiet. Where was the promised guidance, the clear signs, the reaffirmation of their purpose? They had prayed once with fierce, desperate intensity, but nothing seemed to shift in their reality, and so they eventually stopped. They stopped asking for help, stopped clinging to hope, and stopped truly believing that anyone was coming to rescue them. And that, my friend, is the precise, miraculous moment you appeared. You arrived not with a flash of fire or a boom of thunder, but with the subtle, profound power of presence, with authentic kindness, and with a steady, unshakable light. You didn't come to perform a miracle for them. You became the miracle, and the wildest, most humbling part of this whole divine exchange is that you didn't even realize the magnitude of what you were doing. You simply spoke a kind word, you just listened with an open heart, you merely showed up and remained present, but in that pure, unassuming act, you powerfully reignited something they had mournfully concluded was long dead and buried. You weren't just a source of temporary comfort, you were an essential confirmation. You were the living, breathing proof that the divine had never, for a single second, truly left them. You were the evidence that their quiet, unspoken cry had, in fact, still reached the highest heaven. Your profound arrival was never ever random. You didn't stumble upon them. You were intentionally sent to them, arriving at the absolute edge, that dangerous, sacred boundary between total surrender and catastrophic collapse. You materialized at the exact second they whispered their final, desperate plea. God, if you still see me, send a sign. You were the sign. You were the answer. Heaven didn't feel the need to send a theological sermon. He didn't deploy a blinding bolt of lightning. He sent you, not to meticulously fix their broken belief system, not to rescue them with flawlessly eloquent words, but to serve as the undeniable, living reminder that someone still fiercely sees the buried beauty they possess. You were sent to be the soul who still recognizes the divine spark hidden deep inside them. You were sent to be the person who still profoundly cares, because when people reach that point of spiritual exhaustion and start to lose their faith, they don't need to be aggressively preached at. They need, more than anything else in the world, to be seen, and that is the sacred, powerful thing you did for them. You never once tried to change who they were at their core. Instead, you reminded them of the magnificent identity they already possessed. You instantly saw the light that lay hidden beneath their ashes. You spoke directly to the royalty concealed beneath the emotional rubble, and that realization shook them to their core. How, they must have wondered, could a relative stranger look at their most profound brokenness and still, without hesitation, call it sacred? How could someone simply walk into the deepest, darkest space of their personal shadow and behave as if that ground was still holy? But that is precisely the miracle that unfolded. Without ever fully realizing the impact, you became a metaphorical lighthouse for their soul. You weren't shouting instructions through a megaphone. You were simply standing, glowing, and anchored in your truth. From the outside world, it looked like a perfectly simple interaction. Conversation, a kind gesture, a passing moment. But on the inside of their soul, their entire world began a necessary, profound shift. Their weary heart began to whisper a tentative truth. Maybe, just maybe, I am not completely invisible. Maybe the divine still has his unwavering eyes on me. Maybe this devastating place I'm in is not the final end of my story. And in that infinitesimally tiny, powerful moment, the fragile flame of faith flickered to life again. It wasn't a raging bonfire yet, but it was powerfully enough. Enough to give them the strength to take one more small, necessary step forward. Enough to finally lift their bowed head, enough to simply breathe again, not just to mechanically survive, but to profoundly remember who they were. And now, here is the question that must be allowed to haunt the silence. What if that single, small moment saved their ultimate destiny? What if their entire beautiful story, a story that was dangerously close to ending right then, is now only just beginning because you powerfully obeyed a subtle, quiet pull you couldn't even fully understand? What if the divine didn't just send you to desperately reignite someone else's dwindling faith, but to simultaneously awaken your own powerful, untapped calling? Because something monumental is forming in the spiritual atmosphere for you next. It is a moment that will not only completely validate everything you have ever instinctively felt, but it will vividly expose exactly how many lives are intrinsically attached to your humble obedience. You were originally sent for one particular soul. But what if that one was simply the profound beginning of a much larger, ongoing mission? Stay right here with this truth, because the realization that is about to dawn on you will forcefully reframe every single connection you have ever questioned, and will finally open your eyes to the authentic, powerful reason heaven continues to strategically place certain, specific souls directly in your path. There is a truth about you, your nature, and your spirit that you have never been able to logically explain. You have always walked through this life with an intense, raw sensitivity, feeling everything around you. Not just your own personal pain, but the unspoken pain of countless others. Not just your own emotions, but powerful, heavy emotions that seem to come from nowhere. Like heavy, unexpected waves, silent spiritual storms, and invisible weights settling on your heart. You have consistently felt profound sadness without a personal story to justify it. You have felt the crushing weight of battles you couldn't even name. You have carried grief that you absolutely did not earn. And for what felt like forever, your internal question was, what is fundamentally wrong with me? But, listen closely, there was nothing wrong with you. There was, and is, something profoundly divine about you. Because what you, in your confusion, labeled as an unbearable burden, was actually the clearest evidence of your assignment. You were never born with the mandate to simply blend seamlessly into the background. You were born to sense, to carry, to heal, and to spiritually intercept. While the majority of people walk through the world largely untouched by the deeper spiritual reality, you walked through it completely activated. Your heart has always functioned like a spiritual radar, expertly picking up signals that no one else even registers, sensing deep, unseen truths, and instantaneously knowing when a soul near you is silently screaming for rescue. You undoubtedly tried to ignore this intense sensitivity. You tried to shake it off like dust, but that powerful, raw spiritual awareness never once left you. This is because it was never simple, human sensitivity. It was sacred, spiritual equipment. You were intrinsically wired for an unseen mission, a calling that absolutely required you to feel and perceive far beyond the limitations of the surface reality. That is precisely why you could never comfortably sit still in spaces that felt fundamentally fake. It explains why you often felt utterly exhausted after even brief, shallow small talk. And it clarifies why you felt powerfully drawn to certain people while being intensely repelled by others, even if they had never personally wronged you. Your soul was actively reading things that your conscious mind was completely unable to explain, because you don't just exist in the world. You operate within it. You are a carrier. You carry a specific spiritual weight. And the heavens are keenly aware of this profound truth. When the Creator assigns a soul to be a carrier of His light, He simultaneously gifts them with a spiritual sensitivity that the majority of humanity will simply never understand. You were never ever too much. You were in fact highly tuned. You were never weak in the way you feared. You were intentionally sent, and that is the ultimate, non-negotiable reason why they found you. The broken, the hidden, the ones who had lost the ability to even utter the word help. But somehow you managed to hear them anyway. That is precisely why they instantly opened their heart to you. That's why they spilled the darkest contents of their soul in a very first conversation. That's why complete strangers felt an immediate, unshakable safety in telling you their most devastating childhood trauma without even knowing your last name. This happened because your very presence carried something sacred. It didn't just passively listen to their words. It actively healed the atmosphere around them. You were not sent to lecture them on their failings. You were sent to powerfully restore a sacred atmosphere. And the most incredible part of this entire story is that you likely believed this was just a normal part of human interaction. You genuinely thought that everyone could feel the depth of what you felt. You thought every person's spirit shook with recognition when they passed by someone in profound spiritual pain. But no, my chosen one, this is your unique gift. You are not just simply empathetic. You are, in essence, prophetic in your seeing. You don't just passively care, you actively carry. You carry the fire of conviction. You carry the breakthrough of revelation. You carry divine insight and a powerful, healing presence that is capable of shaking the chains off people without you ever needing to say a single word. That is why they were instinctively drawn to you. That is the reason you were utterly incapable of walking away, even when the mission became physically painful, even when it exacted a heavy cost on your own emotional energy, even when it felt profoundly draining to keep showing up again and again, because deep within the infallible wisdom of your soul, you recognized the sacred assignment. You did not stay by their side because it was easy or convenient. You stayed because that mission was intricately encoded into the very essence of your being. And here is the profound, earth-shattering realization that is about to crack something wide open inside your spirit. What if you have been living your entire life beneath the true weight of your spiritual anointing without ever fully realizing its magnitude? What if every single intense emotion you mistakenly labeled as a flaw was, in reality, a divine frequency perfectly tuned for these sacred encounters? What if the very thing that made you feel consistently different, often isolated, for your entire life was the clearest possible evidence that you were chosen? Because once you finally start to see this truth, once you fully grasp that this was never random sensitivity, but a meticulously planned heavenly setup, you will instantly stop apologizing for the intensity of who you are. You will stop desperately trying to numb or diminish the power of your incredible gift, and you will begin to finally walk in the fierce boldness of a soul who knows, without any doubt, that they were specifically assigned for this time. And here is the most urgent part of this entire message. There is something else intrinsically attached to your life's unfolding story. Another layer of purpose, another weight of responsibility, another sacred assignment that has already begun its inevitable movement directly toward you. You might not have the full picture yet, but it is unequivocally on its way, and when it finally arrives, you will require everything you have carried and learned up until this very moment. This is because the next soul who is coming to find you is not just profoundly broken. They are also chosen, just like you, but they, too, have forgotten their identity, and heaven is placing its absolute trust in you to help them remember. Are you truly ready for this next step? Because what is coming next will test every single belief you have ever held about your unique sensitivity, the reality of your life's purpose, and the magnitude of your spiritual legacy. There are no accidents in the magnificent architecture of heaven's plan, no misplaced opportunities, no random meetings, no by-chance conversations that hold no meaning. We resort to calling these moments coincidence, because it is often much easier to believe the universe is a chaotic accident than to fully accept the terrifying, profound beauty of divine orchestration. But the simple truth is that your steps were ordered. Your specific timing was impeccably divine, and that particular soul you cross paths with, that was never a detour from your path, that was the mission itself. They were not just a small part of your ordinary day. They were a crucial, pre-written chapter in your personal scroll, a page in your greater purpose, placed there with intention. And while you may have felt unsure, perhaps awkward, or even unprepared when you first met them, heaven was neither. Heaven knew with absolute certainty exactly what it was doing. You didn't arrive too early. You weren't a moment too late. You walked into that critical moment at the exact second eternity had highlighted in red. You believed you were simply being a good person, just being available to a need. But you were, in reality, powerfully fulfilling a heavenly alignment. That soul, that angel who had fallen silently, who had tragically lost their way, whose inherent light was perilously flickering out, was not an annoying interruption in your sacred journey. They were the reason for it, because what you ultimately rescued was not just a person's life. You saved a future path, you rescued an entire destiny. You reached deep into the dense fog of spiritual confusion and pulled someone back into radiant clarity, back into their true divine alignment, and back into their original, powerful identity. And here is the crucial, often overlooked truth that most people miss entirely. When you consciously step into your divine assignment, you do not just subtly touch one life. You dramatically shift entire spiritual timelines. You forcefully realign destinies. You alter the course of bloodlines. You interrupt and dismantle toxic generational patterns. You did not, on the ground, visually see the profound, far-reaching ripples of your action, but heaven did, because the one you rescued was already a carrier themselves, holding the weight of others. And when their inner light finally came back on, they instantaneously became a powerful, necessary light for someone else in need. That one random, a moment in time, became the divine tipping point for an entire chain reaction of profound healing. And you minimized it, thinking it was small, but it was never small. It was utterly strategic. Your simple, anchored presence was the exact medicine their fragile soul required. Not because you are flawless or somehow magically perfect, but because you were available to the calling. Because your spirit, without being told, answered a deep, primal call that your physical mouth never even heard the sound of. And that, my friend, is precisely what made the moment so intensely powerful. You didn't force any outcome. You didn't attempt to control the results. You simply showed up in fierce obedience to a profound impulse you couldn't even clearly articulate. But the divine knew everything. He saw that moment, the collision of your two souls, before either of you were even born into this world. He knew with unerring accuracy exactly where they would eventually stumble and fall, and he knew exactly who was the most qualified to reach them. Not the loudest voice, not the most intellectually educated person, not the most eloquent speaker, but the most chosen one, you. Because the Creator knew that when this precious soul reached the absolute edge, when they were about to close the door on all hope forever, when the spiritual silence became utterly unbearable, you would powerfully walk in. Not by luck, not by sheer coincidence, but by flawless divine strategy. You were not the answer to their prayer. You were the perfect, inevitable answer to God's plan, and that is the fundamental reason why you were utterly unable to ignore the pull. That is why the weight of it kept relentlessly tugging at your heart. That is why you couldn't simply move on when others, with good intentions, told you to let them go. It's because your soul remembered what your conscious mind had forgotten. This was never random, this was sacred, and now, as you look back on every fleeting moment, every inner whisper, every strange, powerful pull towards someone you didn't even possess the words to help, you are finally starting to see the profound truth, aren't you? The patterns, the spiritual setups, the ingenious strategy. You didn't just stumble into their personal storm. You were strategically assigned to walk directly into it, powerfully carrying the light of heaven. And here is the most incredible truth yet. If heaven was this intentional and strategic before, what does that say about what is coming next? Because this was not designed to be a one-time, isolated mission. This was rigorous training. This was essential activation. This was the Creator explicitly revealing your divine function in a world that is desperately starving for pure light. And just when you start to feel like the assignment is safely over, the real, ongoing mission begins. There is another critical moment already actively forming, another soul being meticulously prepared in the unseen. And guess who is being perfectly positioned for that next divine encounter? You. Get ready now, because what is coming next will demand far more of your inherent light, more of your fearless boldness, and more of your deep, divine awareness than you have ever demonstrated before. But this time you will walk in fully knowing who you are. You are not merely a helpful friend. You are not just a kind healer. You are not simply a kind soul casually passing by. You are a deliberate, profound strategy in unstoppable motion. This was never just an ordinary moment in time. This was never just a motivational video. This was a sacred summons. If something deep inside you burned, broke open, or powerfully awakened, it is because your spirit remembers its contract. You have always known, deep beyond the reach of logic, deep beyond the grasp of language, that you were never meant to be ordinary. You didn't just walk past pain, you felt it. You clearly heard its cry in the silence. You saw the truth behind the eyes of those who pretended everything was fine, because you were sent, planted, positioned, and strategically hidden in plain sight until the precise soul desperately needed your unique light. And now the veil has been decisively lifted. Now the undeniable truth is powerfully loud. You were not the one in need of rescue. You were the one specifically assigned to lift what others had tragically buried, to fiercely love what others had abandoned, to stand firmly between the brink of total collapse and the promise of redemption and powerfully declare, "Not on my watch." That was never coincidence. It was a strategy of immense scale. It was profound trust in your character. It was God personally choosing you. So the urgent question is no longer, why do I feel so intensely? Or why do the broken keep finding me? No. Now the only question that truly matters is, how will I walk and operate now that I finally know who I am? Because now you have been activated, profoundly awakened, and completely confirmed in your identity. You didn't imagine any of this. You weren't being overly sensitive. Heaven has been speaking this entire time, and this message is the undeniable echo of your immense, unstoppable calling. So, hear me clearly, chosen one. You carry fire. You carry divine alignment. You carry the precise answers for souls who don't even know the vocabulary for what they are desperately searching for. You are not weak. You are intrinsically wired for spiritual warfare, not the kind fought with loud, visible noise, but the kind fought with an unshakable presence, with grace, and with a holy, powerful weight. So, rise up now. Walk differently, speak with new conviction. See every single future encounter from this moment on as profoundly divine, because it is, and you are. If your soul is actively roaring its yes, right now, if something eternal and true inside you has just snapped powerfully into place, then do not stay silent. Let heaven see it. Let all darkness within and around you tremble. Let the next soul awaiting your light hear you coming with power. Now go and carry the fire. Shift every atmosphere you enter. Move and operate like the powerful one who is sent, because you were and you always will be.